Hello, and welcome to channel Ein Key, and I am your host, Voluntary. One of the sites I like to follow is a site called Eric Peters Autos. I've learned quite a lot about automobiles and the laws and regulations surrounding them. His primary job is to review new cars, but he also has a lot to say about the industry as a whole and the relationship between the industry and the government. He is critical of several features of the automotive industry as a whole, especially the safety regulations and safety devices, because as he sees it, they replace active driving with having the car replace the care of the driver. He also objects because they increase the cost in what could be considered a race to the worst, as automobile companies are in a race to create new safety features and then petition the government to mandate them, causing the other companies to race to catch up to implement the same safety features. By reading his site, I have learned that some companies are actually making brand new classic cars. They lease the designs from the owning companies, and they can make the vehicles without the many mandated safety features as long as they make fewer than 500 of each vehicle per year. Of course, that means sacrificing the economy of scale, which means that in order to get a practical, efficient, simple, and attractive automobile, you have to pay a very large sum. The typical vehicle of this model costs over 6 figures. For some reason, apparently, if you can afford a car that expensive, you do not need the safety features that all the little people need. I've learned a lot about the life cycle of an automobile. As it turns out, when a company manufactures a model of an automobile, they also manufacture a certain number of spare parts. When these parts are used up, people who need them have to turn to aftermarket substitutes if available, and eventually to pulling the part from scrapyards. When even the scrapyards are out of parts, that model of automobile is at the end of its useful life cycle. Of course, all the features being added also add to the cost, which makes cars harder to afford, which leads to the 5-year auto loan and so on. In light of all of this, I tried to communicate a few ideas I had to Mr. Eric Peters. Initially, I had the idea of a company selling unassembled cars and having the end customer assemble them. I saw a few logistical problems, especially the heavy weight of some of the parts, but it does enable one to pick and choose. However, it would not be too hard to consider unassembled cars to be the same as cars, though from the government's point of view, the advantage would be short-lived. On the other hand, there are certain advances in technology that are going to revolutionize the automotive industry. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get Eric Peters' attention, not being that large a presence at his site, which is unfortunate because I would love to get his feedback on this. These advances already exist and are going to change the whole dynamic from start to finish. Those who support gun rights have already seen the advantages these new technologies have to offer, as these advances are already dealing a death blow to all gun control legislation. I am, of course, talking about 3D printing. When these first came out, gun rights advocates saw the potential. Of course, anti-gun zealots mocked them for it, noting that the early 3D printers were not capable of making sturdy, long-lasting firearms. I noted that the technology will improve as it always does. The first cell phones were very bulky affairs, only usable by the wealthy. We have calculators today that have more power than some of the early home computers. At this point, it should be obvious how this will help in the case with automobiles. First of all, the supply of spare parts will be magnified. I'm sure that there will be attempts by the automotive companies and the government to consider any home manufacture of these parts to be some sort of intellectual property infringement. But a shape is just a shape. And as the government discovered with the Liberator, once something is on the internet, it is there forever. Code is nothing more than code. It can be expressed in several ways. It can even be expressed as a series of hexadecimal digits as a text file, which can be converted to binary and then converted to code. So parts can be made. Of course, there are objections based on structural durability, but many of the parts in a car are no longer metal thanks to fuel efficiency regulations that directly compete with the safety regulations. There are lots of plastic and rubber parts in a car. All of these can be made with a lower end printer. Of course, some parts are metal and must be metal. However, we now have 3D printed metal. It used to require a machine shop to create metal parts. I know this because I've seen parts made in a machine shop, and I find what they do to be quite impressive. I also know the tools they use are expensive. For a long time, they were the only way to manufacture custom parts. Not anymore. Yes, the more expensive printers can and do print metal, and the technology is only going to improve. That fixes the spare parts issue. Of course, once we start down this road, the end is obvious. It will be possible for someone with skill in both the mechanical and computer fields to start designing something new. This is where things get interesting. Remember the extremely expensive classic cars that the wealthy can get that others cannot? These can be made and sold because they are made in extremely small scale. They can be made in quantities of less than 500. A unique car, never before made by anyone, is made in a quantity of less than 500. Plus, the person making it can decide for themselves whether to include or leave out any feature. Do you want airbags? Or should they be left out? Or just 2 of them instead of the 18 or more that manufacturers are trying to squeeze in? How about the lane assist, brake assist, backup cameras, and so on that many people actually do not want but are forced to buy? These are all only required in the manufactured cars produced on a quantity of scale in order to get government approval to sell at scale. And importantly, these cars can be made simple, easy for the average person to repair, as was done a long time ago. And once the code is already written, there is an unlimited supply of unique spare parts. These cars will be both unique and have no end of life cycle limitations. So, to answer the rather sarcastically asked question, yes, I would indeed download a car. thank you for watching. We're now in the double digits for subscribers, and hopefully we will only keep growing. So please like, share, comment, and subscribe to help my channel grow.